Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Branching Out podcast, where we explore jobs and projects within ground control. Today, we are talking to the inimitable Malcolm Watson, an RB Utility Project Manager. Now, there's a bit of a mouthful. It's certainly a varied and fascinating role. So let's hear all about it. Welcome, Malcolm. It would be great if you could just introduce yourself and what is your job title? What do you do?
Well, I'm Malcolm Watson. Nice to be with you, Neil. Thanks for the invite. Basically, my title is ARB Surveyor Project Manager. I work within utilities, and the contract I work for is National Grid Energy Distribution, used to be Western Power.
Right.
If you go and look at a typical day, I've got to say there's no such thing in this role.
That was going to be a question.
It changes every day's got changing priorities, but of course that brings new opportunities.
Sure.
But if we're talking about a current day as we here now in 23, my typical day will start with conversation with a cutting team or cutting teams I'm responsible for, as really just to check that they're logged onto our Stay Safe system, which is a superb system.
Right.
I can stand testimony to that, having had to use it in an emergency earlier this year. It really does work. Basically, we just check that they're en route to the arranged work. They've got no issues, no vehicle problems. And that's a great win-win, really, because it starts your day out with conversation, anything between 8:30 in the morning.
Okay.
And also you get some personal positive interaction with the cutting teams every day.
Yes.
After that, after a cup of tea, I'll probably sat at my desk raising work orders for teams or organising teams or gaining consents from landowners from where we've surveyed. That's the main part of currently what we're doing. There'll be an element of updating forecasting sheets and liaising with people such as client wayleaves officers, traffic management companies, agencies such as highways or councils for things we've got to do.
Yep.
Dependent on the day, there could be meetings with colleagues, like I've had this morning, a trip out with the senior manager. We have to factor those different things in, and they can change daily. Yesterday I was out, for example, visiting customers, reviewing and auditing some works that have been completed. I was also surveying some defects that had been identified. Some were defects, some weren't. And the day may involve meeting up with a contractor where we'll look at health and safety. So we may do a toolbox talk on safety, or we'll run through a compliance safety audit, which is done monthly with the cutting teams, and a full audit is done every 6 months. So that's fairly typical. We could be on a shutdown, where we have to close off the power for a set of time. So like I say, the days are very varied.
So I was going to obviously quite a few bits there to unpack. So going back slightly, utilities can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So in your world, what are you meaning by utilities?
Utilities is electricity. So basically anything from low voltage, 1,000 watt, for me personally, up to 33 kV.
Okay.
Anything above 33, 66 kV upwards is looked after by another division, which is resilience. We're maintenance. So basically, our job will be more maintaining the lower voltage line. So anything that's going into the house or moving across fields, that you see as you're driving along.
Sure.
And just maintaining the vegetation from around those conductors and the transformers and the poles to keep them safe and to keep all the signage clear.
Yeah.
The resilience boys are going in for the bigger pylons that you see, so they get involved in a lot more forestry side. But ours is very much customer facing once we've surveyed.
Yes, interesting. And for those that don't use it, office staff, etc., you seem to be quite an advocate of these Stay Safe. So tell us a bit about that.
Well, basically, in the morning, we'd all do it. We'll log on to the system, the Stay Safe system, and that will track where you are.
Right.
Not so much for a monitoring tool. That's not what it's really used for at all.
Yep.
But it's more if there's a situation, as in, say, there's a fault report on the line, and we need to get a cutting team to a branch that's fallen or a tree that's fallen. We can see where the teams are. We can see where the project managers are. In the instance that I had an accident on some farmland earlier in the year, and within seconds, because it was a fall, as an alarm goes off, there's like a vibration alert that you can set, or a fall alert. There's all sorts of tweaks you can put in there.
Yes.
And it picked up that I'd had an accident, and within 2 minutes I'd had 3 phone calls. Are you okay? Where are you?
Wow.
I would then say within 5 minutes there was somebody with me to help me.
Yeah.
I won't go into the details. It was quite serious. There was nothing wrong with what we were doing. It was something that wasn't signed, hadn't got correct signage on a farm, and I entered into an area that was very dangerous, as it turned out.
Sure.
So it works on those levels, and that's really what it's there for.
Interesting.
We know that everybody's safe, basically, and it is stay
Yeah.
safe. There's also a great little thing on there that if you are in a position where you may be challenged or you feel unsafe,
Yeah.
very rare this happens, but it can happen.
Yes.
There's a method where you can click a button on your phone, be the volume button or whatever you set, a set number of times, 3 times, 5 times, and that will instigate a call.
Right. Interesting.
So it really is about keeping people safe. It's a superb system.
Yeah, and great to hear that there is a system. I'm interested. One question that kind of really sprung to mind, because thankfully, and thank you, Malcolm, for volunteering to be on the podcast early on, rather than being slightly strong-armed into it at this stage. So I'm interested because one of the things you commented when you said, "Oh yeah, I'll be interested," is people don't kind of really understand what we do. So what are the kind of the misconceptions or stereotypes about your job that you'd like to debunk?
Well, I think that the one of the main stereotypes, rightly or wrongly, is a term that's used within arboriculture, really.
Mm-hmm.
And it's historical. It came up the other day, funnily enough, in a conversation, and it's about clearance, not appearance.
Oh, tell me more.
Now that's interesting. As I've been in before I came into GC, I was working as a surveyor. Before that, I'd been in arboriculture and general management. But we have a set clearance that we need to achieve from the power lines and from the equipment to keep the lines working, to keep them safe, to keep members of the public safe if they're nearby, and to guarantee a continued supply. And that's a legal requirement that all the energy distributors are required to do, be that National Grid, Scottish Electric, whoever it is. And to do that, we have a clearance that we have to gain of 2 meters, 3 meters, 4 meters over a 5-year period. And that may mean just cutting one side of a tree or cutting one part of a hedge.
Sure.
And for a long while, people have said, "Oh, it's clearance, not appearance," because you can't keep the apical dominance or the shape.
Yes.
Sorry, you can't keep the shape of the tree.
Yeah.
Where we can, we do. There's pruning points that we'll go back to, and an awful lot of that is then working with the client, working with the customer, and in general terms, people do understand that you're there to provide a service.
Right.
That if somebody's got a tree or vegetation next to a line, and heaven forbid anything should happen and it takes power out, it's not just to say his farm that's going to be affected. It could be the entire village. I don't think anybody wants the entire village turning up with pitchforks. My freezer's not working. So I think most people generally understand what we're trying to achieve. But I think within the industry where we do pride ourselves on standards. I mean, we work to British Standard 3998, arboricultural standard, and the cuts have to be completed to that standard. But we don't go to the full extent of, say, a crown reduction where it just needs a side prune or a reduction in height. So sometimes it is, we're seen as a poor relation, I think, in arboriculture. And really we're not. I mean, you have to be very skilled to work around live lines, which very often we are. It costs money to shut lines down, so shutdowns are kept to a minimum. But obviously, where it's safety critical, they'll be implemented. But it takes skill to do that kind of work. There's a lot of training goes into it. Same with surveying. As a tree surveyor, I used to go out and look at the health and safety of the tree, check for fungus, check for root problems or identification of weak branches, unions, that type of thing. And we still do to an extent. But the surveying within this model is for clearance and for safety. We still do look at weak unions or trees within a distance that could cause disruption, but that comes onto to a separate part of the report.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because as a previous chainsaw operator myself, I wouldn't have wanted to cut anywhere near a power line. Would never even attempted it. I would have run a mile for that one. So it's interesting that.
Well, most of it's by hand, Neil. We don't allow
Yes.
any sort of pole saws or things like that near live
Right.
lines.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Again, I think there's a potential, not misunderstanding, but lack of knowledge that people do
Yes.
think that the cutters are out there running at the tree with the chain running and all that kind of stuff. So I'm interested. Tell us a bit more about that standard you mentioned.
Well, the ARB standard is a British standard. 399 is a British standard.
Yeah.
That will tell you, amongst other things, where your pruning points are, the amount of the crown, for example, that you can take off, certainly no more than 30%,
Yeah.
where these cuts should be, how the cuts should be left, the angle of the cuts. It's a standard that really any arboricultural person should be working to.
Yes.
From your tree surgeon that comes and prunes your fruit trees or your leylandii to the work that we do. But it is best standard, and being the company we work to best practice all the way through. You know,
I think it's useful that people know there is such a thing. It's not just an arbitrary somebody wanders along and think, oh, we'll take that much off. Actually, there's a reason, a purpose, and a quality behind that, which I think is really good. Yeah.
Interesting that you say quality, because quality is the overriding thing.
Yeah. And from what you said, quality and safety.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. Safety is paramount. The very, very first thing before you step out the door, and before we've got any teams stepping out the door, and this comes right from the very top of the company down. Everybody has this attitude of get home safe, return home safe.
Yeah.
And it's refreshing to hear that right from the very senior members of the company down to general managers that you work with, even ourselves. It is our mantra. And it's good. It works. It works.
So talk me through what a typical, you talked about going kind of on site and doing some of those initial surveys. So what would you be looking at or looking for during something like that?
Well, the probably easiest to explain how we survey. I'm trying to put it into layman's terms and not be overcomplicated. But imagine you've got a number of wooden poles running across a field. And you've got these lines of electricity going across to each pole, with the bars going across with the different bits of equipment on there.
Yes.
We will start at a point, and each pole has got a number. So we work across the poles. It gets interesting where they go off on T-junctions and across different bits of land. But we will start at a point, usually at the primary unit where the main source of power is.
Right.
We will walk out from there across the lines, and we'll do it pole by pole by pole. So we'll survey from one pole to the other pole. Is there any vegetation nearby? No, it's clear. That is wonderful. It means we can move on and get another job done. We will also check while we're doing that, though, is there any damage to the pole? Just as a general thing for the client. The client doesn't go and look at every single pole. So, for example, is a tractor caught the end of it? Is there some subsidence in the ground? Things of that nature. The main thing is the danger of death sign visible? That is such a high legal requirement. I mean, somebody might come along. I mean, I've known people say, oh, I thought that was a telegraph pole. No, telegraph pole is completely different. So, don't try and climb that. Thank you very much. And that's why, for a layman, if you want to know the difference, electricity pole will have no little steps in it. A telegraph pole will have those little metal steps towards the top.
Oh, wow.
So that's one of the easiest ways of telling the difference. So, we make sure the danger of death sign's there and all the numbers. Now, if we move on to the next pole, and there may be a number of trees at the side of it, or a couple of trees, or hedgerow. And we know, as I've stated through the specifications that are laid out, legal specifications, a legal framework, we have to guarantee a clearance of those lines, of that equipment, that transformer, whatever it may be, for 5 years. And this is where it gets a little bit specialist, because you have to know your fast-growing species to your slow-growing species. If you cut, is it going to make the tree or the vegetation react and suddenly throw off a lot of really fast growth, which is going to cause a problem where we're going to have to go back in 2 or 3 years? Many things like that to consider. But the overriding objective is to ensure that for the next 5 years, there's a continuation of supply of power, and that it's safe. So if a tree's climbable, for example, you don't want somebody to be able to climb and be able to reach near to a cable.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that's the sort of thing that we'll look at. We'll then decide what work's required. Is it a fell? Is it a reduction? Is it a hedge cut? Is it take out high spots? Lots of different things we can do. We'll record that into our system that we have within the business. That generates work. From there on, we will then generate what's called a permission document, which goes to
Okay.
the landowner. And the landowner can clearly see which trees we're talking about, the location of the trees by map and by photograph, a
Sure.
detail of all the works and how we'll complete them. There's also a glossary of terms that explains to somebody what a pollard is, what a crown reduction is, skirt lift,
Yeah.
all the things that may be in there. We will then issue that to the landowner. That could be via the post. It could be by email if we've got the details on file, which we often have. Or it may be going and visiting them and knocking on the door and talking to them about it,
Yeah.
which may, of course, come through after an email. The interesting challenges that come from that is over 5 years, an awful lot happens with the selling of land and properties. So
Sure.
you may have somebody's details, but that person may have sold that land. It may have been split into smaller parcels.
Yeah.
It might be part of a group-owned land where it's split into different segments. It might be public ownership. It might be council land. It's
Yeah.
so many variables. Somebody may have sold it and suddenly there's houses built there. Where do these come from?
Yeah.
So that's where it gets intricate. But in a nutshell, that's what we do. At the start of the year, we'll go and survey. We'll probably spend 3 months, 4 months out in the field surveying all these poles, thousands
Yeah.
of them. We walk across, and in all weathers. You can't just wait for a nice day to go out. It can be in
Yeah.
foul, atrocious weather, but you do it. It's part of it.
Yeah.
You get good and bad. Then after that, we've got the process of getting the permissions, and then we have to plan the cutting program, which is basically what I'm in the middle of doing now. Is issuing the work to the cutting teams, the arborists, contractors who work for us, to ensure that that's completed within that contract year. And still with a mind now to thinking we're in November, January, I've got to start surveying again.
Yes.
So it's very much about planning. This job really is about planning and being organised.
Yeah. Wow. So much of what you've been talking about is that quality and safety, part of it. Within your role, where does the kind of sustainability, biodiversity stuff fit?
It fits when you're surveying and when you're recommending the works, for example. I mean, a perfect example, I was on a couple of estates yesterday. We've got agreement to leave the logs and timber and brash for them to use. They're going to use the chip where they can use it on their land. We often leave logs where people use ecology piles.
Nice.
Nowhere near the poles or anything, so people can't climb up.
Yes, of course.
And we've always got that ecology mind there in the back of our heads. And likewise, when we're looking at say a veteran tree or a very mature tree, what's in that tree?
Yes.
Is the potential for bat roosting, for example? If there is, let's get it eco surveyed. If we take this down, what's it going to do to the environment? What are those trees doing for the water table?
Yeah.
There's those considerations we make as well.
Again, that's the beauty of having people like yourselves on this podcast. It's really helping people understand that, if you think about doing a tree survey, if you're not in the know, it could be just wandering around saying, "Yeah, we need a couple of branches off that bit."
Absolutely.
There's so many links, consequences, things that you're having to take into account.
So many facets. I mean, an interesting one is things like fast-growing species, willow trees in particular, ash trees.
Yeah.
What has been noticed within the industry is really over the last, I'd say, 5 to 7 years, those species and others have started reacting quicker to cuts.
Right.
And I recently, at the start of the year, did a couple of months secondment survey. Well, I was just surveying willow trees and ash trees all over several counties to pull up a report that we've supplied to the client. Not asked for, not required, purely a voluntary thing by ground control. And it identified that we were needing to go back in 3 years rather than 5 years. So rather than waiting for the client to hit us with defects and faults, we were proactively noticing that we need to change our approach to cutting certain species.
Yes.
We've gone along, we've cut, which is, what we would have done. But the consequence of that cut is that it shot out a lot of fast growth, and we've got to go back in 3 years' time.
Yeah.
Whereby if we'd have left it, we or cut smaller or cut lower, or there's all sorts of parameters, it would have reacted differently. So that's better for the client, it's better for GC, it's better for the environment. So we've adapted. So as another facet, and a great thing, we had a stand down day where all the surveyors were out, or were taken to a land with actual bands to go and survey, with all these variances in there, so that we had first-hand feel and knowledge of how things were changing.
So always, as the saying goes, always learning.
Always, constantly.
That's great. On each episode, we do end the episode with a bit of a slightly silly question, just to end it on a high, and I try and change the question each time. If you could swap jobs with any fictional character for a day, who would it be?
That's an interesting one. That's very interesting, because I've had lots of different roles through the years, from sort of sales management and retail to international management.
Yeah.
Oh, whose role would I swap with?
Yeah, any fictional character.
Fictional character. Wow. Let me think. Okay. There's a reason I'm going to say this.
Go on then.
As a local reason.
Bring it on.
Fictional character would be Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, okay.
And not because of the Watson connection, but an interesting character.
Yep.
If you've read, most people have read the books or seen the films or the TV programs.
Yeah.
Very interesting, complex, amusing character. But the thing I like about Sherlock Holmes is his thought process.
Right.
He seems to see things and look and monitor and able to deduce a lot quicker than anybody else. It'd be great to spend a day in that brain.
Yeah,
really would. And the reason I sort of said that is, a lot of people don't know, but his character was based on a real life detective from my hometown of Leicester.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
wow.
And there's a building in Leicester that the guy's name was Tanky Smith, and he was the first ever detective.
Yes.
And there's a building in Leicester on London Road in Leicester, still stands. It was his house, and if you look to the very top, there's I think it's 22, looks like gargoyles, but they're not. It's 22 different characters that he used to dress up as and go. And his trick was to go into the ale houses of the day and the different dens and hear who was doing what, who was going where, and that's how he got his detective rater. And that is who Conan Doyle based Sherlock Holmes on.
Fascinating.
So
and it's you probably, to an extent, channel your inner Sherlock Holmes when you're doing your surveys. You're out producing. Right?
I don't yet have a pipe, anyways.
So thanks so much, Malcolm. That is amazing. Really fascinating. Welcome. Great to kind of hear what you do and the complexity that you end up getting involved with, and actually how it certainly helps explain you saying it was very difficult to say what a typical day is, because you're doing such a broad range of roles.
Yeah. So we haven't even touched on the reporting process.
Yeah.
And the forecasting and the spreadsheets that you work with.
Maybe we can get you back for another episode another time.
Of the office-based thing.
Yeah, Malcolm Watson Part 2. So thanks so much, Malcolm. That is amazing. Really good to talk to you.
I hope it's useful and can do something.
And there you have it, folks. Malcolm Watson, an absolute natural on a podcast, I think you'll agree. Really nice, easy to chat to, and really fascinating. I could certainly listen to a lot more of those stories. Please do subscribe to the podcast. And until next time, take care.